just start by saying I'm excited to talk to you today.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you too.
I always think about this when I'm about to talk to you. I have a bookshelf on my many shelves of books. I have
Oh,
one shelf that's dedicated half to Timothy Morton and half to Jeffrey Kripal.
oh my word. Gosh, that's great.
That is
That's
my Rice University shelf, I guess.
ah,
And
that's
I
great.
realized today that I've been studying your work for about 10 years. You
Wow.
know, you've had such a big intellectual influence over my thinking, but also just my, what I admire about your work
Mm,
is you are developing a very original understanding of reality. And
that's very kind of you.
you use your publications to keep incrementally uh, sort of releasing the next installment of that
Yeah,
evolving view.
you're right.
I've modeled myself on that. So I've just learned so much from you over the years, and I think today is going to be an interesting conversation. I've been looking at your book, The Ecological Thought and Dark Ecology, both of which I've read in the past. And Dark Ecology I actually used in a course that I taught, so I went through that one quite extensively. And what I'm seeing is how, at least in my mind, and I'm assuming we're going to get to this before the end, how the spiritual experience you spoke to me about the last time we talked, how deeply aligned it is with what you have been expressing. I mean, it's from one point of view, it may look like a big shift, but from another point of view, it's perfectly aligned with everything that you've ever talked about. I mean, it's almost a natural consequence of the explorations you've been doing.
Jeff, on that subject, I'd love you to tell me what you think that is, because, from a certain point of view, I can really only think if I'm working with other people. And a lot of this experience that I've been having, as far as it's in line with the way that I think in any case, has been in the form of accepting a kind of hitherto unthought logical structure. I can't help thinking about the subtitle of that book, Dark Ecology. For the subtitle is "For a Logic of Future Coexistence," and the way that phrase sort of rings inside of me is very much to do with logic per se. Right, we were just sort of talking about where the best place to do a recording is, and I happen to be doing it in my closet, and there's a lot of stuff hanging down in the closet. And logic, if it's anything, is the way things hang together. That's sort of what logic is, But before and beyond, logical operators like if, then, and logic squares and certain styles of logic, a logic is a way for things to hang together. So Jeff, tell me what happened to me. This is not a quiz, by the way. This it really would be curious to know.
Sure. Well, my memory, because it really struck with me, you spoke about certain vegan meatballs to your son. And in that moment, you became aware of a kind of energetic field that was being emitted from your body. And you saw how it was extending into a kind of more generalized field, an amalgamated field. And you saw how how that is a manifestation of the connection of all things, the interconnectedness between all things. And as I was preparing for this interview, I was very struck by the way you describe weird essentialism in dark ecology. And what you say there is that, yes, things are distinct. It isn't that everything one big mushy oneness in the end. There are distinct things, but the boundaries between things are very fuzzy and overlapping and interconnected. And when I was reading that in Dark Ecology, I was thinking of your experience of this energetic fuzziness, right? The skin is quite a distinct endpoint. So if you're only relating to yourself materially, there's a distinct ending. But beyond that, energetically, you extend out, not infinitely, perhaps, but into some, as maybe unknown distance from your body, into the field of everybody else's extension, and you overlap and interpenetrate with other people. And I just thought, oh, that experience that you had is a very natural extension of the way you've been thinking anyway.
Yeah, we obviously rely on people in another way, right? Like, even though, like, so I'm tape measure right now, very far away from you, but we're relying on each other by talking to each other, because we can hear each other, and there are things that are actually empirically far away. You could measure them as billions of light years away. There's a black hole in the middle of the Milky Way galaxy. The star system near to around it is Sagittarius A. As we're talking about it, it is, to use the fancy terminology, phenomenologically near, in a way that some things that are very intimate to me are actually far. Many philosophers who I like a lot talk about this. But, the one thing that's really getting to me right now is the way in which that experience you're describing had a decidedly Christian valence to it, right? And one thing I've been writing about recently is this phrase, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. When you look at the Greek, because the original is in Greek, right? It's Her Basileia, which is the kingdom as a kind of a substance, right? The feminine nouns in Greek are a substance, right? So to going along with your idea of this energetic field as a sort of substantial thing, something like realm, without thinking of it in particular as ruled by a monarch, it's just a handy word, I think, for that moment, to describe some kind of substantial, actually physical thing. Her Basileia, and then the word for heaven actually is ton uranon, which is the genitive of Uranos. So it's the kingdom of the heavens. And when in Greek one referred to the heavens, one was referring to what we would call outer space, actually. The heavens, in this case, being the fixed sphere, the fixed outer sphere of Ptolemaic, astronomy, which is as far as they could go in thinking about it. For them, it was a kind of hard, glossy sphere, right? But so the realm of outer space, it's translated into contemporary English, right, is at hand. At hand could mean a couple of different things. Engiken is the Greek verb, right? So Her Basileia ton uranon, so engiken Her Basileia ton uranon is the way it's said, with the verb at the beginning, as is sometimes the case in Greek and always the case in Latin, or at least very often the case in Latin, except in poetry sometimes. And engiken is engizdein. The verb is, it actually literally means, and I was just writing about this 2 days ago, so it's fresh on my mind. Engizdein means to be next, right? As in, you're next in line to the throne. I'll serve whoever is next, please. Next guest, please. Proximate in terms of actually, next in the next moment, or the next thing I'm going to say, or what is next to me, So this could mean either of two things, it seems to me. It could mean imminent with an I, right? It could mean that it's everything is the kingdom of the heavens, what is actually tangible as the physical universe, right? It's literally, this is what is being said, is intimately proximate to me in a way that is actually disturbingly uncanny, right? This funny mystical experience that I had was to some extent is still having it. is a kind of because it opened up my awareness, a sort of disturbing proximity. And actually the Aramaic for at hand, the closest Aramaic for, if Jesus really said that, it would have been in Aramaic. And the closest in Aramaic is the Aramaic for proximity, right? And it's the kind of proximity that happens when something is malfunctioning. When you have to think about something, when you have to be aware, when you are aware of something, because it's malfunctioning, right? Your software is breaking or glitching or something like that. So you're very aware of it and you have to fix it, right? So there's a kind of way in which it's uncanny. Heidegger would say vorhanden. It's present at hand. That kind of Engizdein, that kind of being next to, right? There's a kind of way in which that really could be true, because the verb is the plural imperative, metanoiete. It means you should change your mind. Meta means change, but it also can mean you should reflect. You should bend your mind around. Meta is around, yeah. You should go meta. You should actually turn your mind around. Repent is actually a very bad translation for metanoiete. For the kingdom of heaven, for the realm of the outer space is imminent with an I, right? Next in line, yeah. Or it could mean it's at hand in another Heideggerian sense, which means it's in your pocket. You've got this. It's immanent with an A, right? Instead of being immanent with an I, it's immanent with an A. In other words, you don't have to think about it. It's just there, right? This kingdom of this realm of the outer space, which contains Earth, yeah, is just right there. You don't have to even worry about it. It's like it's under your skin. It is your skin. In fact, in a funny way, it's the most phenomenologically distant thing. I think this is why, going along with the second one for a minute, it's the word heavens rather than earth or yourself, right? Because actually, the most phenomenologically distant thing is the quote unquote you that is being aware of all these things. It's further away than the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way is the awareness of the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way galaxy, right? But if you turn your mind around, which is meditation, you can become aware of this thing that is supposedly far away. It's heaven-like in its distance, but it is in fact, it's under your skin. It's sort of the two things are being said there, and it's actually rather undecidable which of those two things. Is it something that's kind of leering out towards you because something's malfunctioning, or is it imminent? And what if it was both, right? What if you could only experience ever the most intimate proximity of your very being through a kind of malfunction, right? A kind of realization one of the ways would be some kind of experience that just occurs to you without your willing it. What the hell is this? I didn't ask for this. I didn't invent this, right? And it would be experienced as a kind of malfunction, actually, like something's wrong. Something's unquote wrong. It could be very pleasurably wrong. A lot of the time, what's happened to me is extremely pleasantly wrong, yeah, and as opposed to unpleasantly wrong, But if you're going to really kind of give it a texture, it would be a sort of feeling of unease. It might be pleasant, might be not pleasant, right? But the unease in this case is alerting you to the fact that there is a logically deeper layer of being that is just default, right? It's uneasy because there's a malfunction. Like experience is different from your ego idea of what's going on. But this is a signal about some default thing that is comes with the software of being sentient at all, I feel. Meaning that if plants are sentient and we think that they are now. It means plants can have this. It means that whatever is called religion lives at a level at which plant life, and their probably single-celled organism, can, quote-unquote, experience, right? The minimal experience, if you think about it, is registering that something has poisoned you. You know, there you are, just floating through the ocean. You're a single-celled organism, and you're just sort of happily floating through the ocean. Boom! Suddenly something comes in the permeable membrane, and it's like, wait a minute, what happened? You know, did I just get poisoned by accident? You know, the level we call narcissism, right? The level where you have to absorb things to live, but that might mean that you absorb poison, right? The very unfortunately about to be the president again guy uses McDonald's as a globalized, distributed poison taster because they're obsessed with being poisoned because they have NPD. And, you know, so if everybody else eats McDonald's, it means McDonald's is okay, so I can eat McDonald's, right? It's like the medieval poison taster. Only every McDonald's eater is now the poison taster for you because you're eating the same kind of thing as they are. And and this is where religion lives, right? Like, do I expel the poison or do I live with the poison? You know, I can live with just enough poison to not kill me, or I can expel the poison no matter what. You know, unfortunately, a lot of religion is about expelling the bad stuff in the name of the scapegoat, right? Let's get rid of the evil. And then sort of more, I'm going to say authentic religion, just to say that, is like accepting the poison a bit, you know, like allowing the poison to happen. The idea of the neighbor is a potentially poisonous being who's very proximate to me, who I can't ward off, who I can't, you know, every time I try to otherize them, they're still there. I have to do very violent things like mass deport them if I want to try to get rid of them, but they're still going to haunt my nightmares, yeah. So they're proximate to me. This is the notion of the neighbor, yeah. This intrinsically poisonous thing that is actually a kind of medicine, you know. And so what if religion was actually saying, you know, just allow your biology to do that, right? Just your biology will poop for you. You don't have to make it into a moral thing. You can vomit and poop. Babies can vomit and poop before they can even breathe, yeah. You can do that, you know. The guy said, "Let the dead bury their dead." You know, you can just let it do that. That's what biology does, and religion is actually just allowing that for that, and then allowing space for seeming like things that are analogous for that. This vomit level of life is actually where morality lives on another level.
So I want to continue on some of the threads that you've just opened up. Of course, our conversation always goes in whatever direction it wants to go, but it always goes in an interesting direction. So in terms of your energetic experience and many of the things that you were just saying about heaven and how it's closer than close, right? It's sometimes the furthest away things are actually the closest, made me think of another term from dark ecology, which I think is just a magnificent term that you use when you refer to the archlithic, which I see as a kind of, well, you define it as the realm where the primordial relationship between humans and non-humans exists. It's beyond time and space, and that makes it, in a sense, non-existent.
Yes, very well said. The notion of the archaeolithic is like the notion of the Paleolithic, right? When we say Paleolithic, we're talking about Stone Age, you know, ancient Stone Age. Lithic means to do with stone. Paleo is ancient. Then there's the Neolithic, which is the more recent Stone Age. Stonehenge comes to mind, right? Those stone circles. Archaeolithic is referring to the fact that whatever was going on then on a Wikipedia timeline is ongoing now, unquote, on a Wikipedia timeline, that actually it's better to think of these things as intrinsic to the format of being the kind of things that we are, by which is not meant a sort of universalistic, transhistorical fact about human beings, but instead a kind of logically primordial relationality to the biosphere that we grew out of, right? We grew out of a biosphere, yeah? Like apples grew out of a tree. I love this phrase of Alan Watts, that the humans grew out of a biosphere, out of the universe. Consciousness grew out of the universe like an apple growing out of a tree. Karl Marx actually says it. It's a very underused thing that he says. Even he doesn't really use it. In his section on species being in the philosophical manuscripts, he says, first of all, the thing that we often think, in various ways, that the biosphere, he doesn't say the biosphere, but let's just make him say the biosphere, because that's what we're talking about here, is an extension of your body. Yeah, so you use firewood, and you use potatoes, and you use things in the environment to create your home and eat, and so on. And we're quite familiar with that way of talking in Marx, actually. He makes it quite clear that it isn't even a potato until you've picked it and fried it and eaten it or sold it or whatever. The notion of use value is that, right? It's not that there is an intrinsic potato, it's that there isn't a potato until a human being has used it, unquote. Anyway, he says another thing, which is the really suggestive thing that no one picks up on. He says, you are also an extension of the biosphere, the other way around, right? The biosphere is an extension of you. You are also an extension of the biosphere. And that's, for me, that's the interesting one. That's the one that we can't get rid of. Phenomenologically, you're still in the biosphere when you're in outer space. You have to breathe. There's always a biosphere, right? If you try to move to Mars, you still have to create a biosphere, and it's going to be a human-flavored biosphere. So you're well defined as a kind of organism/environment. That's another Alan Wattsism that I like, which I think he's gotten from Gregory Bateson, right? That a life form is always a life form plus an environment. That the life form is different from the environment, but the life form is not absolutely different from its environment. There's a sort of, as you say earlier, sort of uncanny overlap between the two, right? And this would be the Archaeolithic, and it is a intrinsically weird interaction that consists in a kind of a strange loops of all kinds, and is inherently playful. The thing about that book, Jeff, actually, is that it pairs really well with a book by two anthropologists, David Graeber and David Wengrow, called The Dawn of Everything, which they published a couple of years later. And it's quite nice that we all came to the same conclusion. I came to it through philosophy. They came to it through anthropology, archaeology. That is, what went wrong, such that we live in the awful world that we live in, yeah? Asking that very question in that very way is unfortunately an output of the world that we live in. Like all Garden of Eden stories are stories about how we had to do farming, and you can find them in the Upanishads, you can find them in Buddhism, you can find them in Judaism, obviously Christianity and so on. These stories are basically self-reinforcing ideologies. Well, we just had to create a hierarchy, and we just had to exploit people, and that's just the way it is. It was great once, but how come it was so great if it screwed up? Right? If it was that great, how come it screwed up in the first place? Well, let's just admit it couldn't have been that great. It couldn't have been this perfect state, right? It actually had to have been a state of extreme ambiguous, which is still the state. The only thing that may have changed is that the world that we live in takes itself really, really seriously. There's very little room for Christmas. I was just saying in the supermarket to my wife Trina, I wish it could be Christmas every day, as in the song, right? But this is the trouble, right? We live in a world where reality is defined as the time in between, Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter, and all that, right? As opposed to the holiday, the holy day is the normal, and everything else is the deviation, right? And why? Because it is a little bit about farming. It's because we actually live in farmer-centric worlds. and this is another parallel between dark ecology and the dawn of everything. They're basically saying farming was originally a kind of mystical, playful, theological practice. For example, the Egyptian gardens of Adonis, which were to do with certain religious festivals, and women would make these little window boxes, right, and do these little gardens. And people started doing it on a mass scale everywhere, and it was called farming, right? And it's not so much to do with hierarchy as in kings and monarchs. It's to do with another kind of hierarchy, which is a more sort of insidious hierarchy, which is the implicit conservatism of relying on an algorithm. A farming technique is an algorithm. An algorithm is a recipe for creating a certain kind of value, right? You know, and the basic principle is, well, it worked last year, so let's do it again next year. Why change it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, this is sounds normal, sounds benign. It is benign, right? Like if it worked last year, why not do it this year? The trouble is that scaled up to 12,000 years, it's almost destroyed the biosphere, and we've got fascism around the world happening, all in the name of an unthinkingness, an unthinking quality, which I think perhaps Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, they're trying to sort of restart the reflexive quality, right? When in the gospel it says metanoieta, it means reflect. Yeah, think about it. You know, you can't just live life on automatic. It's not going to work like that. It's going to cause a lot of destruction. To think about Hannah Arendt and her beautiful idea of the banality of evil, which really means that evil is banality. You know, banality is evil. Yeah, the evil of banality, she should have said, right? Like just hitting retweet, you don't have to believe in horrible anti-Semitic ideas, you just have to retweet them, right? That's what it is about, right? I was just following orders is exactly how evil works in a certain way. This is the Eichmann defense, right? So what if that was actually sort of globally true, and the trouble with AI actually is that AI is it's the I. It's the A. Everyone's focusing on the I. Like, oh, what happens when machines become intelligent? You know, heaven knows I might already be a machine that may or may not be intelligent. Right. The trouble with AI is the A. It's the automation. It's the fact that you can ask ChatGPT to write an essay that would take you a few hours. Ping, 5 seconds. Yeah, and it's using every other essay that's ever been done, so it's patching it together out of the past, as in this farming technique, right? It's making it out of the past, and this sort of turgid inertia of the past, like a kind of bad dream that's kind of weighing on everybody all the time, is the issue, right? So David Graeber and David Wengrow argue the same thing a different way. They say like farmer-centric societies took over because they were very productive, because they created a lot of wealth, right? Because they were based on efficiency. Whereas in a world where the monarch is like just this guy, you know, and he lives in a different village, or she lives in a different village, and it's actually rather irritating to be the monarch. Or like in an Inuit world where you're communists in the winter because you have to huddle together for warmth, and then you're monarchists in the summer, right? It's not hierarchy per se isn't the problem. It's the unplayful, serious. It's the seriousness of whatever it is, right? Like, well, it worked before. You mustn't deviate. You must not deviate from the program because the program got us to survive another year, so we have to do it again. Yeah, that's the issue, right? And that's the way in which you can spin out and sort of like your connection to your actual existence has been severed in some way because you're just following a habitual pattern. And this is now scaled up to, we can see it as in a petri dish, right? When you scale it up to planet scale and you scale it up to thousands of years, this doesn't work so great. And so in long answer to your question, what if the thing called religion, let's just call it that, was holding the political instructions for what to do next? Many people, such as Gandhi and King, seemed to begin to think so, right? What if, you know, love is the way and give peace a chance and all these things that we automatically, if we're political, dismiss as too soppy, right? What if they actually were political instructions that scaled up to this level? We're talking about the most basic, right? Like when something's very large and pervasive, it also means that it's to do with the most basic stuff. And we're all about sort of what we take in and what we excrete. We're back to this narcissism question, right? What if love thy neighbor was an essential part of any future politics as a way to transcend the situation that we're in?
Everything that you're saying right now leads me to another of you're in your writing, you are very good at creating terms that are meaningful. So in dark ecology, another one of those terms is agri-logics. And I think that's what you're talking about now, which is the kind of thinking that developed through agriculture. And you're essentially saying, and this gets really to the heart of the issue that we're doing on ecology, you're saying that what we need is I think moving from this agri-logics way of thinking to something that you called econosis, which is a much deeper way of allowing truth to reveal itself rather than deducing truth from parts.
Well, forgive me for just fixing that just a little bit. It's not logic, it's logistics. The phrase is agri-logistics. But you're saying something in the region of what I'm holding to be true here, because what this kind of very serious farmer-centric society does is it begins to confuse logic with logistics. The fact that it worked out, last year, and the fact that therefore we're going to do it again, becomes embedded in how we think thinking should proceed, right? Rather than celebrating and enjoying paradoxes and anomalies between things, we start to try to eliminate them, yeah? And we start to confuse logic with logistics, and it becomes very confusing when we develop computation, yeah? Before the physical computer was invented, computation was invented, right? A lot to do with a challenge thrown down by Immanuel Kant. Great philosophers ask dumb questions, and Marx kind of, how can you make money? You buy a house, it's worth X, you try to sell it for X, 2X, but everybody else's house went up to 2X as well, so you're not going to make any money. How can you make money? Everybody seems to be making money, but how is it even possible for a capitalist to make money? Darwin, how come these two birds' beaks are different? They're the same bird. They just happen to live on different islands. That's dumb. What's that all about? Kant, how can you be right? 1 and 1 is 2. We all know that. It's true on Alpha Centauri. But how come we know it's right? Oh, oops, nobody checked, right? The process of figuring out how come we didn't check and how can we check is how computing evolved in the 19th century with all those lovely Boolean logical operators like to and next and go to and for and if and then and so on, right? And, we're beginning now to confuse logic with logistics because we're inventing hypothetical and real, as in like the difference engine or the Turing machine, machinery that will compute for us, that will do the computation for us. Yeah. And, the very unfortunate thing about the place I live, I live in America. You probably can't tell from my souvenir accent that I'm American, and I'm going to admit that people with my accent, roughly, did this to the world. The Brits did this, right? We enslaved a lot of people, and we outsourced it all to the Caribbean and America. Some other people did the same thing, but we were really, really good at it, right? And then we kind of, having created this Frankenstein's monster, we sort of left it alone, and it was left a little bit to its own devices, right? And when I first came to America, I noticed a certain syndrome that you may not notice if you've lived here all your life. There is a certain kind of lazy boy approach to knowledge, especially amongst, and I'm going to point to myself again, white guys. People who would, in exams, in particular, in the vast majority, white males, in exams that I was invigilating, would try to do the exam as quickly as they could, slam it down on my desk and then walk out, slam the door. When exams were written, as opposed to online, they would want to perform, I don't have to work for this. I don't have to sweat. Somebody else should be sweating. You see what see where I'm going here? Somebody else should be working hard. You know, we've just watched a terrible presidential campaign in which one of the people worked their ass off, slaved away, is in the metaphorical language, and the other guy did next to nothing. The other guy was worse than lazy. The other guy performed this kind of white boy, I don't have to work. And I'm going to get back to computation here. This is definitely the place where the computer would have been invented, because very unfortunately, it's all about, please forgive me, I'm talking about myself here, cheating. You know, it's all about finding a workaround. Like, how can I get this done X times faster so I don't have to think about it, right? Becomes what logic, that's what logic devolves into. It devolves into computation. Then computation devolves into efficiency, efficient computation. Right, the most efficient computation is the most "quote unquote" intelligent, you know, and you know, STEM is giving us this idea that really reflection is just this rather sinister, expensive optional extra that only very wealthy people should do, and everybody else should be learning how to compute. And the people who never took a humanities class should be in charge because they think efficiently. They think like engineers. The trouble with engineering is it's all about creating solutions for things that already happen, right? Whereas humanities, much more sensibly, is about imagining things that are impossible at the moment from the future, yeah? And unless people who are in charge of, you know, making more efficient things know that the future might be different, they're going to just make stuff worse, yeah? And in the key of this kind of lazy boy approach, right? And the lazy boy approach is very much based on, please forgive me again, on the master-slave duality, right? A lot of what we're talking about, the seriousness thereof, is to do with manipulating the world more and more efficiently, which eventually it implies mastery, right? And mastery implies slavery. Yeah, and you know, a silicon wafer is a pretty good visual model of a plantation. It's perfectly organized rows of electrons, perfectly efficiently squiggling around in there, right? These things are not intrinsically. I'm not a Luddite here. I'm saying that as long as we have this template for, you know, getting enslaved beings to create lazy boy workarounds for us, we're going to be stuck in this wash cycle, you know, and it's just going to get nastier and nastier and nastier as the more the people who benefit from this duality sort of try to hold on to it. What's interesting is that the duality itself now becomes very clear to people, and it is, I feel, hope springs eternal in the Timmy's breast, you know, it is about to collapse. So one reason for the intensity of the reaction is that it's about to actually dissolve. Yeah. So this is where the confusion of logic with logistics actually gets you. From a certain point of view, logic is about how things hang together. Logistics is about, you know, let's use the existing hanging together more and more and more efficiently, right? And with a view to mastery, you know. And like I say, mastery implies in slavery, yeah. If you don't like slavery, you had better also go to war against mastery and the very notion of mastery.
So in your writing, you on one hand do what you're doing here, which is kind of explain what our current way of thinking is, because you say there's an ecology of thinking. You also at least give hints, right? Gestures toward a different way of thinking, which I said you called Econosis and dark ecology. And I wanted to just share something with you and see, because I got very excited this morning. I was reading Dark Ecology, and then I was reading the Ecological Thought, and in a very brief summation of what I think your teaching, your philosophy on ecological thinking is. This is not I'm taking it from your book, so it's I just, but it words that worked for me, and I wrote it down, and I wanted to check it with you. It said, uh, the ecological thought is interconnectedness, but only if you understand that interconnectedness is not something that exists outside of the things it connects. And that when I thought that, when that sentence came to me, I thought, oh, that's what he says all the time. It's interconnectedness, but interconnectedness is not a thing that exists independent of the mesh, as you sometimes call it. The mesh is not separate from the things it connects. And it really hit me this morning what that means and why you write the way you write.
That's very well said. To go back to a lamentably unexplored word that you were using in the previous question of econosis, yeah. The idea of knowing, the idea of knowingness is dislocated from this notion of efficiency. Efficiency towards some kind of end, which might be greater efficiency, right? One of the problems in the world is the notion that things have to have a point, that they have to have a telos or a goal or an end, right? And that we need to work towards this with greater and greater efficiency. The biosphere, just purely scientifically, is a non-teleological system. Human beings are not the climax or the end product or the best in any way whatsoever. What happens when you put a teleological system on top of a non-teleological one? Right now it's called capitalism, but, a while before that it was called feudalism. It was still teleological. In big picture, because we're looking at the big picture, same way, right? To maximize happiness by creating more and more efficient ways of getting the corn. When you put a teleological system like that on top of a non-teleological one, the obvious happens. This teleological one munches the other one down to nothing, eventually. And we're at that point, right? Econosis, right? You could go back to this phrase, change your mind, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Metanoiete, right? Metanoiete. How come you can change your mind, right? Changing your mind implies something that happens before that, which is hesitate. Yeah, like, wait a minute. Have you ever been in a situation? My book, Hell, is all about this as well. It's like, you're in the middle of a fight, and you're like, wait a second, why am I even trying? I don't need to be right. This is just stupid. This is ridiculous. I'm just going to stop. Yeah. Of course, you have the option to double down, but you also have the option to go, wait a second, this is dumb. How come that can even happen? How come in a supposedly mechanical universe hesitation can occur? In a funny way, life itself is chemistry hesitating, right? Like, under normal circumstances of the universe, the chemicals would just destroy one another as efficiently as possible. But somehow life is a place where impermanence means you can heal. It means you can grow physically and psychologically. Yeah. It doesn't mean everything's winding down to nothing. It means actually it can be the opposite. Impermanence means you can heal, right? And so, just to go back to this notion of econosis, what it's really about is this knowingness. Yeah, it's not necessarily it's not knowingness of something. It's the knowingness itself is the interesting phenomenon here. Like, how come that can even be? How come that can even be a thing? When you say this phrase, the ecological thought, that's the startling thing about it. Is the hesitation? Is that, wait a second, I'm actually a part of this biosphere, in a very uncanny way, not in a very sort of obvious way, but actually in a way that makes me feel weird. Wow, weird. This is odd. My attempt to transcend my material conditions makes them worse. That's odd. It's uncanny. This uncanniness, this feeling of you could call it transcendence, like sort of baby transcendence. Like, wait a second, I forgot to switch the kettle off. I have to go downstairs and switch it off. That's transcendence, right? Is a symptom of immanence, actually. You know that you grew out of a biosphere because you have these strange, uncanny, hesitant, malfunctiony thoughts, right? Knowing that you're part of the biosphere doesn't get rid of you. I'm very opposed to the idea that the whole of which you are a part makes you disappear or makes you less important. You know, an awful lot of ecological thinking is to do with populations rather than individuals, or with wholes rather than parts, you know. And I find this to be, in the end, it's just proto-fascist to think that way, to think that the whole is more important than the parts. Yeah, the whole is not necessarily more important than the parts, it's just physically bigger. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's ontologically bigger. In fact, since there's only one of it, and it exists the same way as, say, a tree or a duck, the biosphere is fragile. It's less than the life forms that comprise it. There's only one of it, and there's trillions of us, as it were, right? So it's not knowing that you're part of something bigger that absorbs you. The trouble is that this is a very pleasant idea. We've gaslighted ourselves into feeling very pleasant about this. There's a thing that we say to each other a lot, is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, you know. But it's said in other ways, right? Like people, when they say religion, they usually will say, you know, I want to feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself. That's what religion is. It's feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. You've been swallowed by something else. Yeah. I'm actually trying to point out that actual religion, you know, that it is this funny, uncanny sensation of proximity to others, who are now no longer definable as others, but are actually my neighbors, whether they be human beings or cells in my body or bacteria or whatever. Yeah. And this is uncanny, you know, because, you know, how much of these beings do I let in? It's always a political question. You know, it can't be the sort of deep ecological idea that the AIDS virus has just as much of a right to exist as an AIDS patient. You have to make a decision that the AIDS patient is more important and the AIDS virus should be wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah. So this funny idea that actually, you know, now I know that the biospherical parts of me and others equally exist to the human being ones actually makes the political decision more poignant and sort of more kind of potent, right? The interconnectedness itself is not a thing, is to get back to the very nice way that you formulated it, which is different from saying there's no such thing as society. Mrs. Thatcher had a way of saying, you know, there's no such thing as society. Right-wing ideology wants to tell you there's no such thing as global warming, because if we admit that there's this very big thing, it means that we have to all be communists. You know, of course, you know, a few steps down the argument, they might be right in a certain way.
Yes, that's what I got from your books. It's not that interconnectedness doesn't exist. It's just that it doesn't exist outside of the things it connects. It's in us. It's not outside of us. And I think that's the ecological thought, is that it's inside of us.
Yeah, it's inside of us, and the way it manifests to us is as something uncanny. I called it the ecological thought, and I didn't explore that phrase enough. You know, when you read a certain kind of novel, a realist novel, that is to say, a novel that gives you a feeling of reality. It could be sci-fi. It could be a ghost story. In fact, a lot of them are. You know, there's one called The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And the first sentence, yeah, the studio was filled with the scent of attar of roses. The studio. Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway decided that she would buy the flowers herself, right? Wait a minute, there must have been these flowers before I started reading, right? Realism is a hallucination art form. It makes you hallucinate, right? in a kind of don't think of a pink elephant way, right? The ecological thought implies that it's uncannily already there before you started thinking it. That's the deal, right? Like thought is always late to the party, right? My very sort of basic heads, shoulders, knees and toes sense of myself, this is in the Christian Ecology book, right, is a late arriving inversion of the signal coming from the registration of the biosphere on this thing that grew out of it called my body. I'm touching my heads, shoulders, knees and toes right now, right? Worms would get stuck in the tunnels they're building unless they could differentiate themselves from the tunnel they're building, right? Here's the interesting thing. The awareness of the tunnel comes to the worm's sentience a few hundred milliseconds after the tunnel that the worm touched, right? The worm touches the tunnel, the nerve signal enters the sentience a couple of hundred milliseconds. I'm not a scientist, but it's a matter of hundreds of milliseconds later, right? That gets inverted somehow by some system, and so a silhouette version of this is generated, which is worm-shaped, aka the worm can feel itself. That's a few hundred seconds after that, right? So my sense that I'm here, this funny dislocated feeling, is literally the case. It's a couple of hundred milliseconds after a sensation of an environment arriving on my body, a couple of hundred milliseconds after the actual environment arrived on my body, right? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, right? What is talked about in esoteric religion is the fundamental, always already contact with a being or beings that we can't quite see and touch. And the meditation practice is to allow yourself to allow for that awkward, tantalizing quality not to be deleted by some kind of desperate attempt to actually touch them. You know, there's the beautiful title of a Christian one from the Middle Ages, The Cloud of Unknowing, right? Just be a cloud of unknowing. Just kind of, you know, the Tibetan meditation instruction, the Mahamudra, it's meditate like a corpse, you know, just, and, you know, you do it for a while and you're like, I can't feel it, I can't find it. And if you have a good teacher, they're like, that's it. The funny, uncanny sensation that you're dislocated is exhibit A of being located, actually. This funny thing that a lot of ecological ideology is trying to get rid of, which is this sense of difference and dislocation, is really good, you know. And I would argue also that this allows us to connect ecological thought with the kinds of politics of the neighbor, such as anti-racism and feminism, anti-transphobia, that are woefully lacking in previous iterations of ecological theory. You know, if we're going to get with the blue whales, you know, we need to get with each other. So how we treat each other is how we treat the rest of the biosphere. You know, so we're sort of missing a spot, right? And encountering ourselves is uncanny, like I just said, and encountering another person is also uncanny in that sense, right? And this sense of uncanny encounter, that something's already there before I'm thinking about it and ratiocinating about it and feeling about it and whatever else about it, it's already there, right? In what Heidegger will call pre-theoretical sense, right? That, yeah, that's what the word "the" in the phrase "the ecological thought" is really doing.
That's very powerful. The sense that I am always entering a reality that pre-exists. That I'm always encountering myself, but I can never encounter myself the way I am because I'm always a little bit after the fact.
Yeah, we're a little bit out of phase. In a certain way, the Garden of Eden, so to speak, right? The biospherical relationships out of which we grew, yeah, let's just say that's the Garden of Eden, is in the future, right? Phenomenologically speaking, the actual physical world is always I'm always experiencing a time-delayed past version of it, and I'm always experiencing a time-delayed past version of myself, right? And in fact, experience as such boils down to remembering that you forgot something. You know, did I just leave the gas on? Did I answer Jeff's question correctly? It boils down, if you're going to boil it and turn it into some kind of Marmite-like thing, it boils down to conscience, right? This little Jiminy Cricket kind of, am I actually wrong? I'm malfunctioning. Something's wrong, right? Deja vu, you know, have we done this before, Jeff? Is this a thing? What if that was the default? We experience it as an anomaly because it's so uncanny, but what if that was the default awareness? Like, wait a minute, is this... I forget, did we just, you know, remembering that you forgot something, right, dislocated, which means that, you know, what we call the Garden of Eden is the future. It's in the future, but more strictly speaking, it is the future, right? We are alienated, not from some perfect past. How could we have got it wrong if it was perfect? We're alienated from the future. And the more we rely on AI systems to build predictable models of that future out over the abyss, the more alienated from that future we get. And again, I'm by no means being a Luddite here.
So I'm just gonna finish this wonderful interview with one last thought, which is, would you say then that the sort of antidote to perhaps the crisis of our world is that we stop relying on the past and start moving toward what the possibility of the future?
When you're doing something that we don't do very often. You're walking down Main Street. You're walking through a mall. It's late at night. You notice there's a club. And coming out of this club is boom, 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 boom. It's really nice techno music. I'm a big fan of techno. You know. You go inside the club, or whatever it is, whatever floats your boat, right? But it has to be some kind of physical, right? And you get involved in a kind of dance. People are already dancing. And you're willing to allow your body to be structured, that is, according to a logic, that is, a way for things to hang together. In this case, disco dancers on the dance floor, in a hitherto unthought way. There you were walking along the street, and you were ready to accept a logical structure that was different from what you expected, right? This acceptance has a feeling to it, right? It could be a feeling of bliss. It could be a feeling of horror. It could be even of funny, right? And so it's a logic has a true, genuine logic, as opposed to logistics, has a feel to it, right? And then you can get really performative about that, and you want to prove to people that you've joined the true church, right? Because what we're really talking about here in Christian language is the Holy Spirit, right? The possibility that a human being can allow for a logic that hasn't yet been thought. Like, wait, do I have to hurt Jeff when we talk? Do I have to be better than him? Do I have to be right all the time? Do I have to do this? Where does that even come from, right? Christianity calls it the Holy Spirit. Is it boil it down to the ability of this life form here to accept a logical structure based on more love and more forgiveness and more kindness and more whatever that they didn't think was possible. Wow, how is that even a thing, right? That's amazing if you think about it, you know. And so, you know, what you're aiming for here is for a genuine relating to that issue, right? Like, there's a plenty of performativity, right? Like, you can go to a Pentecostal church, especially a white one, I would say, where there's this incredibly performative, I've got the Spirit, you know, and I'm going to just do this, hammer away at this mantra, you know, like Pastor Paula, that Trump's religious person, right? The angels are coming, the angels are coming, the angels are coming, the angels are coming. He's like, no, stop hammering me with this thing, you know. Allowing yourself to dance, you know, the black Pentecostalism's got it much better, you know. Allowing yourself to enter a dance that's sort of unfamiliar, you know, And it's not irrational, right? Think about it again. It's not irrational would mean that you're performing it for the benefit of other people. It's actually like accepting a logicality that you didn't know of before, and even accepting the possibility of a logicality, right? The universe itself might be a logical structure discovered within the chaos, the word of God is shush to this extent, right? It's just like, shh, calm down, shh, right? Like, how is that even possible? How can you shush yourself in a nice way? And how can you meditate? How can you sort of calm down, and allow for things just to kind of hang together without pushing them too much, right? This is, to me, the paradise. It's like allowing the form of a sheltering, containing spaciousness, of a hanging together that is not yet anticipated, to kind of shelter you and protect you. With chemicals emitted by humans are now destroying life and turning it back into chemistry. And if anything, each life form is a little kind of paradise garden that is like sheltering from the basic welter of the chaos. But paradise is a great word. Paradise is a verb. Paradise is, for old Iranian, right, that pari means around and dais means build up, right? It's shape around. It's like creating a beautiful bowl that can contain things, right? It's not what you put in it. It's the fact that you're creating this bowl. It's not a closed system. It has to be open, right? It also has to be contingent. Yeah. Every possible logical system, and a snail is a logical system just as much as a computer program is a logical system, must be able to have this opaque, blank, blind spot aspect in it. It's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Within the structure of truth itself is this beautiful opacity, without saying, true things are made out of words, which are made out of squiggles. Within truth itself is this weird silence. Yeah, there are things that logical systems can say that are true, but they can't prove it. Yeah, this should strike us as incredible. This means that even within the thing we call truth, there is this kind of, I think it's a very beautiful aspect of our universe. It makes us very safe, right? And if it had a smell, it would be, for me, the smell of wet clay. It's called petrichor, right? The smell of damp dust after rain, sort of beautiful, neutral, spacious, This is where I disagree with Alan Watts, actually. He's got this very disrespectful contempt for what he calls the ceramic model of the universe, aka the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian Islam one, where God creates the world like a clay. Adam is made out of earth, made out of clay, the intrinsic life form, And actually, I think this is a very nice image, because it's really not about the reification of the object. It's about the paradise, the verb, the creation of this sheltering from. The basic notion is of a beat, right? Just a gap, just being able to introduce into the chaos of the world some kind of gap, We're about to enter a time of potentially stifling totalitarianism. And I actually agree with people who now say chaos agent is actually a good translation of the word fascist, because chaos is like everything is happening all at once, and there's no wiggle room anymore. You can't do anything. You're on the dictator, abuser, whatever that is, time, and it's become congealed, and you're dying for some kind of relief. You're dying for some kind of gap, right? And this is what's precious and wonderful about our physical universe, about life itself, is expressing that wondrousness. And thought, as I just pointed out, is also expressing that wondrousness, right? And the wondrousness is that the chaos itself can be shaped into a lovely, though finite because lovely and lovely because finite format, right? Like the chaos is not completely solid. If truth can contain opacity, then chaos can also contain spaciousness, the other way around, right? The possibility, I'm not talking about potentiality, that gets you into all kinds of weird sort of Western philosophy stuff that's a little bit, I think. It's possibility. It's more sort of open than that. It's less reified than that. So you're right on the money to want to end there, because if there's anything we can do with ourselves for the next, whatever, foreseeable future, we can practice allowing for that fact to be as true as possible inside of ourselves and then in between each other.